My name is Gavin, and I would class myself as an entrepreneur, obsessed with business. We were a paid advertising agency, so we helped brands around the world with their Facebook ads, Google ads, TikTok ads, and we were acquired last year, 2014, and so I'm now out of that business, but it was a great ride.
Can you talk us through step one? What was the very first thing you did to make Yatta real?
Yeah, well, so I guess the journey of Yatter, although the business itself was 4 years old when we sold it, I have been in the marketing world for close to a decade, and that started off. I got into the marketing industry through a failure of another business. So I had a sort of B2B fitness company, and it was a really bad idea, or the execution of the idea was terrible. But through that business, I built relationships with personal trainers and nutritionists and people in the health space. And I realized early on that they weren't very good at marketing. And as being of the age of someone that, I've grown up in social media, I knew a little bit more than them about how to use social media. So I got started as I guess, a social media freelancer where I was just managing social media channels for fitness professionals. And I slowly realized in that business, that was when I started, it was very small scale. I had a part-time job and I was working the business part-time. But what I realized was that a lot of when you're doing a business like social media management, it's very hard to quantify to the client the impact that you're having on their business from a revenue perspective. And so that's kind of slowly got me into the advertising world, because advertising is very different, where you can say, we've spent X and you've generated Y in profit. And I then went in, I said to myself, I want to become the go-to advertising person in the UK. I started to build a personal brand around that, and eventually got to a point where, I'd built a reasonable business there, just sort of operating as myself. But I realized that it's not a business that you can exit or sell, because it was my personal brand. It was under my name, and nobody's going to buy that because it requires me. So that's when we decided to go down the route of building an agency, coming up with a brand that's separate to myself. And that's what we did 4 years ago.
So when you started building that brand, when did the bigger names start getting in? Let's start actually with the first. How did you get the first client? And then when do you see the bigger brands coming in, and how did you actually get them bigger brands?
Yeah, I think there's something about being in the game long enough that the big brands start to come. So early on, the first clients were very much a case of just getting on LinkedIn, sending as many messages as you could per day to people, getting into networking events, getting into rooms where there's business owners. And generally, with something like marketing, if you speak to a business owner, 9 times out of 10, they're going to have a problem with their marketing. They don't have enough leads. They don't have enough sales coming through the door. So that opens up a door for you to be able to have a conversation with them. And very early on, it's quite easy to then pick up some smaller clients, because you can say to them, I'll charge you a few £100, and it's a bit of a no-brainer for them. It becomes slightly different for smaller businesses that need the help when, you're charging thousands per month, and it's harder for them to justify it. But it's quite easy to just pick up some smaller clients if you're charging a small amount of money, and you just get into the room with business owners because they all need your help. The bigger businesses I found started to come to us mainly from time in the game, whereby, you might work with somebody at a small business early on, and then as they build up their career, they get a job at a larger business, and then they take you in because they had a good experience with you. So things like that start to happen. And also, I wanted to create a predictable system of lead generation early on in the business. So we ran ads basically from day one. And what happens when you run ads for a long period of time is there's like a halo effect, whereby people will have seen your brand and your face for like 2 years. And they start to go, right, we need to speak to these people because they're everywhere. And, it got to a point where almost any room that I went to in Scotland, business room, networking event, people would come up to me and say, I've seen your ads. And that's the bigger names come from things like that,
Yeah.
recommendations, referrals, moving career, as opposed to always just, they saw our ad, they clicked on it straight away and became a client.
Sure. When you decided that you wanted to sell this business, what shifted in your approach? And like, what actually separates a business that you can sell and one that you can't?
Yeah. So I built Yatter from day one, knowing that I wanted to sell it and
Interesting.
I wanted to build it to exit. And the reason that I was so bullish on that was because I'd, ran a freelance business essentially for the last however many years, 5 years, call it. And I knew, right, I want to build a business to sell. And so we have to build it in a certain way. And I think there's a fork in the road for any business that they have to decide, are you building a business to sell, or are you building what I would call a lifestyle business, which is a business that operates in order to generate as much cash as possible for the owner. So there's two different models. And so I went down the route of building the business to sell. And what that does is it creates a really good filter for decisions. Because if you're building to sell, what you need to try and do is understand who is likely to buy that business when you come to sell it. And I knew that our business was likely going to be purchased by another agency, a larger agency who wanted to essentially buy our team and our customers. And so every decision I made in building Yatter from day one, I had in my head, right, is this something that somebody would want or not want when they came to buy us? So every hire we made, team structure, every process system we had, the branding, it was all created with the idea that would somebody want to buy this or not?
What is the difference in the structures and systems from a lifestyle brand business to a business that you're trying to sell?
Yeah, I mean, a, a key example in like the agency model, for example, if I were building an agency with the sole focus of trying to generate as much profit as possible, you would probably do things such as hire less people and maybe contract more people in. So you've got
Okay.
less overheads on things like salaries. You might even offshore the ad management to somewhere like the Philippines where you can get cheaper labor because you're generating more cash. Um, but if you think about it from somebody that would want to buy a business, if you're outsourcing everything or offshoring everything, then what are they actually buying? They're not buying any talent there because they could just go and hire those people themselves.
Yeah.
So when you're building a business to sell, you're constantly thinking what adds value to this business, and obviously hiring talent is one of those key things. And so essentially, you're thinking lifestyle business. What can we do? It's also down to things like behaviors as an owner. Like if you're building a business to sell, you're purposely not taking huge amounts of money out of the business. You're keeping it in the business to reinvest it into the business, into things like growth. Whereas if it's a lifestyle business, you obviously want to try and get as much cash out as you can.
Sure. Something I found interesting in your website and your LinkedIn is there are posts about building a business that runs without you actually working in it. At what point does this become possible for a founder to start working on the business instead of it in?
Yeah, well, I think from day one, everybody should try to. It's very hard, if you start a business and you're, for example, in my industry in marketing, where day one for me, I was managing clients, I was doing sales calls, I was doing everything, and you are doing everything. But one piece of advice I would give everybody is try and carve out time in your diary to be specifically on working on the business. So whether that's like 4 hours on a Friday, for example, where you say, I'm taking no client calls, I'm doing no sales calls, I'm not doing any client delivery, I'm not even looking at my emails. All I'm doing is sitting at my desk with a pen and paper thinking about what's next. That for me is classed as working on the business. It's ideas, it's strategic.
Okay.
So even though in the early days where it's hard to do that, having the discipline to carve that time out is really, really important, because otherwise you just, I've got an analogy of like an architect versus a firefighter. Like an architect, it's big picture, it's strategic. They come in if they think there's issues that need to be resolved, but for the most part, they're sort of bird's eye view, whereas a firefighter's in there, they can't see because of the smoke. They're putting out fires. There's problems everywhere. And founders can be like that as well. And so it's important as a founder, although you might have to roll up your sleeves and do the dirty work, it's important to still carve out time to ensure that you're looking at things from a bird's eye view.
And sort of building on that, you ended up selling Yatta in 3 years, which is ridiculously fast. Were there sort of like 3 or 4 things, maybe 2 to 3 things you can pinpoint that allowed you to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so going back to my point on what is somebody looking to buy, I knew that in our industry, what someone is like, a larger agency, what are they likely to buy? They want to buy recurring revenue. So I ensured that all of our customers were monthly recurring revenue. There was no project work in the business. They would be looking to buy talent. So I ensured that we got the best talent possible, and we had a great team structure. We had a great culture, and everything down to, for example, like the benefits that our team got. So I would love to, as a founder, have given our team, the very, very best benefits, as opposed to not just salary, things like holiday allowance, all those types of things. But if you're building something to sell, you have to understand that the person that's going to buy might not have those benefits in place.
Yeah.
And so, although I'd love to offer those things, we just had standard statutory holiday pay, because it then meant that when somebody bought us, that was something that they could see that they could make better for the team. So every decision that we made, and every decision we made in the business was designed around that. And another key thing that they bought from us was, I'm a massive fan of process and systems. So they were buying a team, they were buying customers, but they were also buying a way of working. And the way that I kind of tried to put it was that they could just copy and paste our business into their business, and it would work from day one. There was no, it wasn't going to take time to get things up to speed.
Building on the systems and processes. So, 3 years, the growth must have been, like the scaling must have been immense. What systems and processes make sure that growth is sustainable for a company, like compared to unsustainable growth?
Yeah, so one of my favorite things to do is what I call process mapping, which is what is the exact process, every step that a customer takes from not knowing who you are, to knowing who you are, to becoming a customer, to then receiving the delivery of whatever product or service it is that you offer. So map out every single step. And then you can start to look at, well, how can we simplify? How can we improve? How can we optimize each step so that the customer gets the very best journey? And once you're able to do that, is you can then, or what we did was we essentially created checklists and training and how-tos against all of those different steps in the process, so that our client delivery process was so locked in and so nailed down that it was easy for the Velstar who purchased us to come and buy us, because everything was there and it was documented. It was easy for new hires to come into the business because they could just pick up the process and systems that we had. And it meant that whether we had 10 clients or 50 clients, the level of service that the client got was exactly the same every time. And over time, that process and system can improve and be iterated on. So a nice example of that is, we found that customers, your ads would go live as a customer. And generally speaking, after 2 to 3 days, we found clients would always email us asking, how are things going? How are things going? I've not had any leads yet, for example. And if a client asks you, if a client says to you, we've not had any leads after 2-3 days, it's an immediate negative downer. So what we did was, in our system, we would just email them after 2 days to say, get in front of the problem. We've not had any leads yet, but that's what we expect, and here's what we're doing as a result. So every single little issue or problem that we knew could crop up in the client experience, we would implement into our system. And that just meant that it was easy to scale, like I say, regardless of the number of clients or the number of team members.
As well. Yeah. So when Velstar bought your business for, how much did they buy it for?
Well, it's undisclosed.
Undisclosed.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I'm afraid.
so how did you maximize value when they came to buy your company?
I think the being able to clearly illustrate what they're buying and how that will impact their business is the most important thing. And also, one of the things that was important to me, but probably also helped us maximize the business, was ensuring that not just it's not just a case of trying to sell your business to them, like a traditional sales call where you're trying to show them how great you are, but it's also getting them to pitch you on why they're the right fit for us. Because
Okay,
I've got,
interesting. Yeah.
12 people on the team who are essentially going to go through a massive change in their career because someone else is going to be their boss and someone else is buying them. So I have to ensure that, it's right for those 12 people as well and right for the business. So I think, by doing that by default, you almost set yourself in a place of authority where, you're not just trying to pitch your business, you're actually trying to find the right partner for it. And thankfully, Bellstar were great.
How does it even happen? Like, let's say you want to sell the business. Do people come to you? Do you put it on like Facebook Marketplace? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, how do you get to the point where you get in front of people to tell them you're selling it?
Yeah. So what happens is we essentially hired an M&A consultant that specializes in selling agencies,
Okay.
and you put together basically a one pager of your business. It's anonymous at that point, but you talk about things like revenue, and you talk about um, number of team, reasons that somebody might be interested in it, all that sort of stuff. A one page document, and they then essentially sent that out to agencies that they knew were interested in acquiring other agencies, and that then created I think we maybe had 6 or 7 different agencies that were interested, and we had sort of initial calls with. And after you've had those sort of initial calls, if they're interested, then they'll put together a letter of intent, which is basically a 1-2 page document that says, we're interested. This would be roughly the figures that we're talking about. These would be roughly the terms. And if that's fine, and you sign, then we go into a period of exclusivity and due diligence. And then you go through a very long process of due diligence where they're looking into every single aspect of the business and, picking it apart, finding things that they need to know. And when that's all done and dusted and they're happy and you've done all the calls and all those types of things, then there's a sales agreement that's drafted. And that's a big, chunky 100+ page document that goes through absolutely every single thing. And then that gets signed and you go into an earnout period, which is, or depends on the terms, but we went into an earnout period, which is pretty common,
Yeah.
where, I essentially work for them for a period of time to ensure a good transition over. And you're responsible for hitting targets as well to ensure that you get your payout at the end of it.
What was the switch in terms of psychology, what was the switch from working as part of their business now when it was yours before? Was that quite an odd relationship?
Yeah. So I thought the hardest part of selling the business would be finding the buyer and selling the business. The hardest part for me mentally was handing over the keys to the business, but still having to be involved in it.
Yeah.
Because I think as an entrepreneur and an owner, you are responsible for everything, but you have the ability to change things if and when required. So if you have a bad month, if you have a good month, it's on your shoulders, it's your responsibility. And therefore you can kind of take it because you're the one that's, making the decisions and controlling things. But when you are then acquired and you're working for somebody and you're still responsible for hitting certain numbers, but you don't have all the levers, as an entrepreneur, that I found that very challenging.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Almost sort of suffocating. I don't mean that because they were great.
Yeah.
I just mean like as an entrepreneur, when you're used to making all the decisions, having all the
Yeah.
control, and then you hand over your baby and all of a sudden someone else has, it's quite a challenging
Well, that's
thing
the
to
thing. A
get your
lot of
head around.
entrepreneurs, they want to start a business so that they don't have to work for someone. But then you sell a business, you often have to go back into working for someone for a period of time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
How
yeah.
how long of a period of time was that stage?
So the earnout we had was 9 months. So it's
Okay.
relatively short, to be honest, for in the grand scheme of things. Some people are tied up for like 3 years,
Oh,
but
really?
yeah,
Okay.
I just couldn't do that. That was part of the deal for me. It was one of the key things I said was I want to get out quickly after the deal is done, because I want to. Part of the motivation for selling was to be able to. I want to go and stretch my muscles in a different industry. And so I wanted to be able to get out of the business relatively quickly so I can then go into something else and get my teeth stuck into something else.
What about on the flip side? So, what point do you tell your employees and the clients that you're selling? Is it before you sell? Is it, I'm guessing it's as soon as you sell and that period starts. But how do you communicate that across and tell them it's all going to be the same? It's going to be okay. That sort of that vibe.
Yeah, that was really challenging, to be honest, because you're going through a period where you're in the process of selling the business, but nothing has been signed.
Yeah.
So you don't want to go, or you can't go and tell your team that the business is maybe being sold, because all that does is creates
Panic.
uncertainty,
Uncertainty.
Imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
panic, exactly. And at the end of the day, nothing might happen.
Yeah.
So you have to operate the business as usual. So, but you feel, or I personally felt bad during that time because I knew this thing that was happening with the business, which was a big thing, but I couldn't tell people.
Yeah.
And you're sort of going through there's a period of time whereby you have to operate business as usual, but you can't really operate business as usual because you've got this big thing looming over you. So what you did, we told the team, like the day after it was done, um, that it was happening. And one of the key things, going back to my point on picking the right partner, was I was very keen that whoever was purchasing us was going to make things better for the team. So better benefits, better salaries, career progression opportunities, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And when you're a business of 12, there are progression opportunities, but there's not as many as in a larger organization. And so that was one of the key things that I was excited about to tell the team. I knew there was going to be uncertainty. I knew there was going to be questions and a little bit of fear. But I also knew that the opportunities that they were going to get were going to be far greater in a larger organization than within our organization. So we just communicated that to them. They're all great. And I think every single person has benefited from
Yeah.
the transaction.
That's brilliant. Yeah.
So you clearly had like a great level of communication in your team, but what have you learned throughout building the company about leadership, and what do you think makes a good leader?
I think leadership's almost one of those things where it's easier to talk about what makes a bad leader. Like
Okay.
everybody knows what a bad leader is. And so, but trying to clarify what a good leader is almost a little bit more challenging. But I
Yeah.
think the key thing that I found was it's important that you as the leader set out a clear vision on what you want to achieve with that business. And you have to do that as early as possible and get every single person on that team bought into that vision. When we first started and I first started hiring people, we never had a vision. And so when you're hiring somebody, it's sort of, you're hiring them for a job. But when you then create a vision on what you're trying to achieve. So for us, for example, it was, we wanted to become the best PPC agency in Scotland. And we had a timeline for that. We then wanted to become the best in the UK, and we had a timeline for that. And so rather than just hiring for a job, we were actually then able to hire people based on
For
our
a
vision.
mission. Yeah.
And that's a massive change. And then what that does is it filters down to absolutely everything else from a leadership and management perspective, whereby you can help people achieve their personal objectives and try and do so in a way that by them working on their personal objectives and achieving them helps the organization achieve their objectives. So you can get people bought into not just the vision, but also their self-improvement that helps both them and the organization. And I think if you don't have that vision, it can be very easy for people to have their own personal goals and objectives that are very different to what the business actually wants. And then everything becomes sort of incohesive. Um, so I think that would be my main point is know
Yeah, interesting. So,
know where
so
you want
every
to go.
single person in the company knew that goal of we want to be the most used, the best agency in the UK. Everyone would have
Exactly.
known that.
Yeah, because one thing I learned was that you have to communicate things so often that you're bored at saying them. So we would
You
almost
build on that. What
every
do you mean by that?
almost every large, we would have quarterly catch-ups. Every quarterly catch-up, maybe even monthly, I would get the slides up that had our vision on it, and I would talk through the vision and share that with them. And by the third time, personally, I'm bored of saying it. I'm going, right, guys, we're going to be the best agency in Scotland, best agency in the UK. But I think the stat is something like you have to repeat it 7 times before people actually start to remember it.
Yeah.
And so over communication is also another leadership trait, I think, which is you have to, as a leader, communicate so much that everybody knows what you're doing, where you're going, why you're doing it. And
Yeah.
for the leader, that can get a little bit monotonous or feel like it's boring to everybody else. But actually, they've got so much going on in their work and their job and their careers that only by repeating it does it break through the noise.
Yeah. I also feel like maybe a lot of young entrepreneurs are scared of big goals like that, but it's actually really important to even just write that down, have it on your office wall, get everyone in the team know about it, not hide from it.
Yeah, I think young entrepreneurs especially, and I'm saying this because I've been through it myself, can often be timid when it comes to goal setting
Yeah.
because they feel like if they set a goal that's so big, people are going to think they're stupid or they're going to laugh at them. But
Yeah.
actually, that is never the case because some people might think it's a bit okay, but most people are going to respect it. And even if they don't believe that you can achieve it, they will respect you for having the bullishness to have that as a goal.
And it inspires other people as well.
Exactly. It's going to inspire the right people and it's going to turn off the people that you don't want anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
Is there one thing you wish founders understood more about entrepreneurship? Like something that's really difficult about it or something that's amazing about it, whatever it is?
The funny thing about being a founder, being an entrepreneur is that you're going to go through extreme highs and extreme lows, and they will happen on a daily basis, on an hourly basis. And you, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, have to be able to stay consistently in the middle at all times. So you don't get too caught up in, the big celebratory highs. You don't get crippled by the lows. You just maintain. And there's going to be periods where things are terrible and everybody around you is running around, panicking, but you have to be able to maintain a consistency and not to be distracted by everyone else running around and keep your own head. And I think if you can do that, that's half the battle because entrepreneurship and running a business is mainly a mental game of who can put up with all of that for the longest time
Yeah.
without getting burnt out or without quitting.
Okay. Looking back to the start of building Yatta, would you have changed anything or would you have done exactly the same?
On the grand scheme of things, I wouldn't change anything. I'm sure there's decisions within that 4 years where I could have made a better decision that may have, improved some part of the business. But I can't think of any key major changes I would make because I sort of had a game plan
Yeah,
and we
that really
achieved it.
stands out. Yeah. Yeah.
We like to end off every episode in a very, very similar way. If you got to talk to your 20-year-old self and give him one line of advice, what would you say to him?
I would say you are on the right track, so have the confidence to just go all in on it. And the reason I say that is I am someone who constantly questions themselves. Am I making the right decision? Oh, this person said that. And I think for too long, especially when I was younger, I would be influenced by external factors too often, when actually, looking back, my gut was probably always right, or right more often than I thought it may have been. So I would stop questioning myself as much.
Gavin,
Perfect.
thanks for joining us today.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having me.